Full summary, themes, characters, and questions set. Brought to you by Stage Masters Kenya, crafters of moments, creators of magic. This summary is done and edited by Momanyi Denken. Welcome to this powerful literary narration presented by Stage Masters Kenya, where stories come alive and knowledge meets performance. Today, we explore the satirical African novel Fathers of Nations, a bold and thought-provoking work that exposes the political, social, and economic realities of post-independence Africa. This is not just a story, it is a mirror reflecting the struggles of a continent searching for direction, justice, and responsible leadership. Introduction: A continent at a crossroads. The novel is set in contemporary Africa, a continent rich in resources, culture, and potential, yet trapped in cycles of poverty, corruption, and poor governance. Despite gaining independence decades ago, many African nations still suffer from the same problems: poverty, disease, ignorance, and inequality. But instead of solving these problems, leaders have allowed new crises to grow: corruption, impunity, greed, and betrayal of public trust. The novel uses satire, humor mixed with criticism, to expose how African leaders who call themselves fathers of nations often fail to care for their citizens. The Four Men, Voices of Change. At the center of the story are four educated and experienced men from different African countries: Professor Kimani from Kenya, Comrade Melusi from Zimbabwe, Engineer Tahir from Libya, and Pastor Chiamaka from Nigeria. Each of these men has suffered under political systems in their countries. They have been ignored, humiliated, and abandoned, despite their intelligence and contribution to society. They represent Africa's intellectuals, professionals, and visionaries, people who want change but are constantly silenced. Their shared frustration pushes them towards one goal: to influence African leaders to adopt reforms that will transform the continent's economic and political systems. The Summit of the Fathers. African presidents, the so-called Fathers of Nations, gather for a grand summit in Banjul, Gambia. The expectation is simple: leaders should discuss Africa's future and create meaningful solutions. But what happens instead? Confusion, division, endless debate without direction. Two rival ideological groups emerge, each pushing its own agenda, but none offers real solutions. The summit becomes symbolic of Africa's leadership crisis. Leaders talk, argue, and posture, but do not act. The satire: Leaders Without Vision. The title, Fathers of Nations, is deeply ironic. A father is expected to guide, protect, and nurture, but these leaders fail to care for their citizens. They lack vision, they lack unity, they lack accountability. Instead of serving the people, they protect their own power. The novel suggests that Africa's greatest problem is not lack of resources, it is lack of leadership. Poverty and economic struggle. The story paints a painful picture of widespread poverty. Even educated people live in hardship. Knowledge is not rewarded. Politics is more profitable than education. Countries depend heavily on international loans that trap them in debt. Foreign institutions influence national policies, limiting real independence. This shows how economic control continues after colonial rule, a form of neo-colonialism. Corruption and betrayal. Corruption is everywhere. Leaders enrich themselves while citizens suffer. Public institutions serve individuals, not nations. Even those who fought for independence are betrayed. Freedom fighters and professionals are forgotten once power is secured. The promise of independence becomes an illusion. Intellectuals versus politicians.
One powerful message in the novel is the conflict between knowledge and power. Scholars and thinkers, people who could transform society, are ignored. Meanwhile, politicians gain wealth and influence. Society celebrates ignorance instead of wisdom. This reversal of values leads to stagnation. Personal suffering and human cost. The story also explores personal tragedy. Comrade Melusi loses his wife through political violence. Engineer Tahir's relationship leads to conflict and physical injury. Professor Kimani faces humiliation and emotional pain. These personal experiences show how political failure affects real human lives. The suffering is not abstract, it is deeply personal. Revenge and conflict. Some characters seek revenge for the injustices they face, but the novel shows that revenge does not bring healing. Instead, it creates more pain and destruction. Hatred cannot build a better society. Only reform, unity, and justice can. Change is possible, but difficult. The novel emphasizes that change is inevitable, but difficult. Africa must transform both physically and ideologically. It must rethink leadership, governance, culture, and social values. But change cannot happen if leaders refuse to listen. Women and society. Women in the story often suffer under political systems and harmful cultural practices. Their struggles reflect broader issues of inequality and injustice. The novel challenges society to reconsider outdated traditions and power structures. The big message: Africa must redefine leadership. True leaders must serve people, not power. They must prioritize development, not personal wealth. They must unite nations, not divide them. Without accountability, progress is impossible. A warning and a call to action. Fathers of Nations is not just a story about politics. It is a warning, a critique, a call for transformation. It challenges readers to question leadership, demand accountability, and imagine a better future. The novel reminds us that independence without good governance is meaningless, and that nations cannot thrive without responsible fathers, leaders who truly care.
Character Analysis Narration KCSE Standard. Professor Kimani, the voice of intellectual frustration. Professor Kimani represents the educated African elite who are ignored by political systems. He is highly learned, rational, and concerned about national development, yet he lives in frustration because leadership does not value knowledge. Traits: intelligent and analytical, patriotic and reform-minded, emotionally wounded by neglect. Significance: he symbolizes Africa's wasted intellectual potential. His struggles show how education alone cannot bring change if leadership is corrupt or dismissive. Role in themes: failure of leadership, neglect of intellectuals, need for structural reform. Comrade Melusi, the political idealist. Melusi is a revolutionary thinker who believes in justice and transformation. However, his personal life is filled with tragedy, including the loss of his wife. Traits: passionate and ideological, courageous but emotionally scarred, deeply committed to social justice. Significance: he represents political activism and the emotional cost of fighting oppression. His life shows that political struggles often come with personal sacrifice. Role in themes: political violence, loss and suffering, disillusionment after independence. Engineer Tahir, the practical modern African. Tahir represents technical progress and modern development. He is skilled and logical, yet even technical knowledge cannot protect him from political instability. Traits: skilled professional, rational thinker, victim of political conflict. Significance: he shows that development is impossible without stable governance. Expertise alone cannot transform a country if leadership is dysfunctional. Role in themes: development versus instability, personal consequences of politics, modernization challenges. Pastor Chiamaka, the moral and spiritual voice. Pastor Chiamaka represents religion and morality in society. He seeks ethical leadership and moral reform. Traits: spiritual and principled, peace-loving, advocates ethical governance. Significance: he symbolizes the moral conscience of society. His presence suggests that political reform must include moral transformation. Role in themes: morality in leadership, religion in social life, ethical responsibility. The Fathers of Nations, symbol of failed leadership. These leaders are not developed as individual heroes, but as a collective symbol of political failure. Traits: self-interested, divided and uncooperative, detached from citizens. Significance: they represent post-independence African leadership that prioritizes power over service. Role in themes: corruption, power abuse, leadership crisis. Themes: deep analysis, KCSE style. 1. Failure of leadership. This is the central theme of the novel. Leaders failed to provide direction, unity, or solutions to national problems. Evidence: ineffective summit discussions, leaders pursuing personal interests, lack of meaningful reform. Author's message: political independence without responsible leadership is meaningless. 2. Corruption and abuse of power. The novel portrays leadership as self-serving rather than people-centered. Effects: economic inequality, poor service delivery, loss of public trust. KCSE insight: corruption prevents national development and destroys democratic institutions. 3. Disillusionment after independence. Independence created hope, but that hope has faded. Why? Poverty still widespread, citizens still oppressed, leaders behave like colonial rulers. Interpretation: freedom without transformation becomes symbolic rather than real. 4. Marginalization of intellectuals. Educated professionals are ignored while unqualified leaders dominate politics. Implication: society rewards power instead of knowledge. Exam interpretation: development requires valuing expertise and informed decision-making. 5. Poverty and economic dependence. Despite natural resources, African nations remain poor and dependent on foreign aid. Causes: mismanagement, debt dependency, weak policies. Author's message: true independence requires economic self-reliance. 6. Political violence and personal suffering. Politics affects ordinary lives deeply. Examples: deaths and injuries, broken families, emotional trauma. Meaning: political instability is not abstract, it destroys real human lives. 7. Change and transformation. The novel emphasizes that Africa must transform politically, economically, and socially. But change requires visionary leadership, unity, and accountability. 8. Moral responsibility in governance. Ethical leadership is presented as essential for progress. Key idea: power without morality leads to exploitation. Satire as a tool of criticism. The novel uses irony and humor to expose serious political problems. Effect: readers recognize the absurdity of leadership failure. KCSE overall interpretation. The novel argues that Africa's biggest challenge is not lack of resources, it is lack of responsible leadership. It calls for ethical governance, respect for knowledge, economic independence, and national unity. This has been a full narrational summary of Fathers of Nations, brought to you by Stage Masters Kenya, crafters of moments, creators of magic. This summary has been carefully prepared and edited by Momanyi Duncan.